was a great event in the Massachusetts ecosystem. It was put on December 6th. Brian, Kayla, Nicole, Rachel, and Anna are the team at Mass Medic who put it on, very much like our own organizations here in Michigan. And they, for their local ecosystem, put this event on. They had representatives from startups, from service providers. They also had Jeff Shuren from CDRH speaking. They're finding that parts of FDA continue to lag, OHT7 especially, because of their heavy involvement in EUA processing during COVID. So that means there's parts of FDA that are catching up more quickly. There are parts of FDA that are still lagging. There's also a lot of reflection on the massive turnover at the agency. While the agency and CDRH in particular did a great job under COVID, it remains that they've lost an immense amount of their staff. In fact, they're having to use contractors to review submissions. Third-party outside contractors are now heavily part of the review process. Now, there are also some new submission mechanisms at the agency. There's something called eStar, and there's something called the Customer Collaboration Portal. And both of these got relatively good reviews from folks. One of those is only about 2 months old. But the Customer Collaboration Portal appears to be a good thing. eStar, not so much. It was not panned, but we'll say it got an 80% rating. Room for improvement. On the software side, the resounding echo was that predetermined change control plans are the hot topic of the day. If you're developing software for FDA, especially if it's artificial intelligence and machine learning software, predetermined change control plans are where all of the focus is going. The idea there is that you ought not to have to go back and resubmit for a change to your software device. You should not have to do another 510K or another de novo. But in order to have that kind of freedom to make changes, you effectively have to predict what kind of changes you're gonna make. Breakthrough device submissions also really high on the list of topics, lots of those happening. They're becoming a little more selective, though, because of so many people wanting to go through that program. There's also a great presentation by Pam Forrest from Covington on the decline in enforcement letters from FDA. Now, you might just think FDA doesn't have as much time to do enforcement, and so people aren't seeing as much of that. But it doesn't mean they're paying less attention. It turns out that what it means is they're using other methods. So rather than just going out there and sending warning letters to people, FDA is maybe being a little nicer. They're doing directed inspections. They're doing what are called untitled letters and more regulatory meetings to perhaps more softly raise concerns before sending a formal 483 or other type of communication to the companies. There was a great presentation from one Eric Bannon of AlvaMed, who gave a great presentation on Q-Sub or pre-submission trends with the FDA. The things that FDA is focusing on in those types of communications, clinical study design and sample size, right up near the top. We've seen that in our practice, and they're seeing that in Boston too. Test plan design. It's such a common thing, and we've told you before about the clinical investigator training that's happening with FDA. I think FDA recognizes that clinical investigators are often focused on creating academic papers. They're not often focused on the type of information that's necessary to be able to get a clearance through FDA. And so test plan design, whether clinical or otherwise, is a really common focus in Q submissions. We also heard from Eric that IDEs are getting harder and harder and harder to get. That, in fact, the standard for getting an IDE now rivals the burden. Actually, I think this was from an internal commentator, one of our staff, who said the weight of that rivals a 510K, that it takes basically as much effort to get approved for a high-risk device trial as it does to get cleared to a 510K. So watch for that. And then the session with Dr. Shuren, who's the head of CDRH, he talked about the agency's and the division's priorities for 2023. And some of it is relatively mundane: implementation of MDUFA, or the Medical Device User Fee Act. The return from COVID was another focus, the agency realizing that they have a lot of coming back to do, as well as strategic priorities for the future. And the one I want to focus on here is actually the return from COVID, because it probably is the biggest point of focus for companies working with FDA. Dr. Shuren noted that the FDA is having to face the reality that the agency is not as much of a destination as it was in years past. In years past, people would make the FDA their career. And today, with the rise of virtual work, remote work, it turns out that FDA doesn't have the holding power right now that the commercial world does. And so the agency is seeing many people come to the FDA for a couple of years and then leave. Now, Dr. Shuren is a great manager. He's done a great job working with his staff. He always has. He really had the place humming pre-COVID and during COVID. But I think what he is having to admit is that people are going to be leaving. They're going to be using FDA now as a stepping stone. And while he's dealing well with that, this is really not very good for those of us in the world of trying to get devices and other products cleared through the agency. Because what it now means is that your regulators, whether they're drug or device or biologic, are mostly fresh out of school. They're mostly fresh PhDs. And while the agency is having to deal with that and do their best to keep people around, recognizing that many will leave, what this means is that for any submission that you do, the chances are that somewhere in the middle of that submission or on the next submission you do, you're not going to have the same regulators. They won't have the track record. They won't have the history. Sure, there will be career people at FDA still, but that number is certainly going down. And that's not generally good news for the rest of the industry. So hopefully there will be a way to change this trend